Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today, I'd like to talk with you about self-deception. I'm not who I really am. After many of my videos, you've left comments asking, how do I understand who I am? I don't understand. I imagine myself one way, but who am I really beneath that image? And that is exactly why I decided to record this video. Now I'd like to speak to you as if it were your birthday, with a few sincere words. I have always truly admired you, with warmth, respect, and genuine affection. You are truly the calmest, strongest, kindest, smartest, and most honest person. Would you like to think of yourself in this way, to recognize yourself in these words, and to hear them said about you? A kind, smart, calm, honest, and strong person? When we imagine ourselves as that kind of person in that moment, we have no complaints about ourselves. Oh, just right. Yes, that's me. I am both calm and strong and honest and smart and a genuinely kind person. And based on what we find pleasant and enjoyable to hear about ourselves, on what truly resonates within us as a deep sense of self-satisfaction, we can then construct or imagine the opposite. This process allows us to better understand ourselves. You see, the ability to think, to analyze and synthesize is the ability to find what is hidden. In other words, if we have one part of a process, then there must also necessarily be a second part of the process, because that process simply cannot exist without its other part. That's logic. So if people say about me, for example, you're a calm person, a stable person, that really resonates within me as something especially pleasant and comforting. Consequently, if someone tells me, you're a hysterical person, an unreliable person, it is instantly and deeply felt as something truly painful inside, emotionally. Or the person saying it is perceived as an attacking enemy. And if it's unpleasant for me to hear that, then consequently, it will be unpleasant for me to know that about myself. But what if I am a hysterical person? No, I'm not hysterical. Or am I? Well, sometimes it does happen. I have emotional outbursts. Let's take a closer look at what hysteria is in general and why we're so afraid to understand this about ourselves. We lose emotional control, or we become excessively emotional, however we choose to name it, or we grow overwhelmingly anxious in certain specific situations. In other words, each of us, at some point in our lives, has been hysterical, outwardly over-emotional, or so excessively filled with our own emotions that it's as if they shattered our personality into a multitude of pieces. Or in a state of stress, or in some kind of manic state, when we're anxiously and chaotically doing something and everything starts falling from our hands, or we start doing foolish things or saying foolish things, or we start unleashing a torrent of some kind of hatred on someone which we later regret. All of this is hysteria. In this video, I want to name this directly and give it the right to exist, so that we can say clearly, this is already happening. This is happening to me right now. Why is it so important not to push this away, not to reject it, not to turn it into something disgusting inside ourselves? Because it will allow you to realize in a prompt and timely manner that your personal limit of endurance has already been reached, that it's truly unbearable to go on. And many people ignore their own limits, and this ignorance forces those limits, that is, the needs for something, to grow louder and louder over time, until it all escalates into some kind of hysteria. So, at the initial stage of this emotionality, we try not to notice it, and it gets louder and louder and louder, until it finally overflows the dam of control and spills outward, when it's already impossible not to notice it. Each of us has some strange, bizarre, and sometimes difficult to understand desires, feelings, or wishes that can seem odd even to ourselves. Each of us also has some idea, some personal sense of what we think would be ideal conditions for our lives, and by acknowledging this in ourselves, we seem to simultaneously acknowledge our own weakness. And we don't want to remember this. We'd like to forget about it, not to notice it. For example, I left the house and didn't take my hand cream with me. Oh, well, I'll manage. But since I'm used to putting cream on my hands, especially in cold weather, I start to feel the dryness. And this dryness first whispers about itself, and then it starts to scream. And I start to become irritable without understanding at all for what reason. Why am I on edge, reacting to something? Or I forgot. I looked in my bag and my wallet isn't there. Ah, I left it at home. I don't have time for this now. I don't want to pay attention to it. And because of this anxiety inside starts to build and build and build. What if I lost it? What if it was stolen from me? That is, I ignore this anxious signal from within, and at some point I realize that I'm only thinking about the wallet. Or I'm in a space where someone is talking loudly to me. I understand that it's not always possible to say to another person, could you please speak a little more quietly? But if there is this opportunity, then if they start to speak just somewhat more quietly, I will perceive the information better. And because we don't acknowledge this hysteria in ourselves, this emotional buildup, we start to project the cause outward. That is, we don't realize that we are attacking ourselves from within, but it seems to us that the world is attacking us. And we start to rationalize it. It's not important. Don't pay attention. So what if the wallet isn't there? So what if the person is talking loudly? Just adapt, and so on. But the hysteria builds. And when you've legitimized it and say, yes, I have, you see, even when I say emotional buildup, it's easier to perceive. But hysteria, it seems like, no, don't talk about me like that. And when we suddenly realize I'm in a hysterical state right now, then it becomes clear. You're no longer expressing your point of view. You're already in an outburst. You're already shouting. That's why people so often fail to notice their own shouting. So I suggest that we officially acknowledge this aspect. Right here, at our little gathering on this YouTube channel. That's it, legalized. Hysteria is within us. It's definitely there. If you don't recognize it, don't see it, don't want to see it, if you have a blind spot there, then it will force you to distort cause and effect relationships. That's what being driven to the edge and so on is all about. The second point, being strong. I am a strong person. I am strong. When a person says weak, they immediately think that they won't survive. And when we think of ourselves as a universal soldier, a certain pride emerges. In other words, being strong is always, well, honorable. You're certainly proud of it, of being strong. I'm quite strong and capable in a certain area of my life. And accordingly, when we hear about ourselves, that's a weak person. It sounds unpleasant to us, which means we won't notice our own weaknesses. You know, it's enough for a person to just get a speck of dust in their eye and they can no longer operate in a normal way, or a pebble in their shoe. But at the same time, they consider themselves somehow invulnerable. In other words, you want to forget about your weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And then creating conditions for maximum efficiency becomes quite difficult, because creating conditions for maximum efficiency is precisely about taking weaknesses into account. That is, when I take all of my weaknesses into account, really thinking about each one and understanding how they affect what I do, then I am able to function more effectively in my life. And just imagine, you were with a person on a trip or in the same room, in the same group, who was constantly saying, I'm in pain, I'm scared, this is hard for me. I'm in pain, I'm scared, this is hard for me. I'm in pain, I'm scared, this is hard for me. By not noticing these signals, like I'm scared, I push myself into that situation. I don't feel safe with this person, I tell myself. You're just imagining things. I get a signal from my body that says, I'm in pain, but I really don't want to actually notice it at all, or I can't take it anymore. A person sometimes breaks themselves, forcing themselves to do something through sheer willpower, and often doesn't notice how they are gradually becoming more and more cruel to themselves. So, at our meeting, let's legalize weakness. I am weak. A person is weak by nature. They are truly a completely defenseless creature. If you take away the comforts and protections of civilization, you can really feel and experience that weakness. And this moment of not recognizing one's own weakness, with that, we immediately move on to the kind person. We like to fantasize about ourselves as being kind. And when someone says, you're cruel, you're evil, you're inhuman, that accusation is very, very serious. We will resist and try to prove them wrong. We will explain that it wasn't cruelty. And this cruelty, we don't notice it when we act from our invented self, as we interact simply with reality. That is, I can do this much, but the fact that I can do less is unacceptable for me to know. Or well, let me think. I have a speck in my eye, but I will ignore it. And that is already cruelty when I don't notice my own pain. This very act of not noticing discomfort. And even when this discomfort cannot be fixed, you can at least identify the anxiety that arises inside and this tension, and that already brings relief. It's as if a person said, "This is unbearable," and you say, "Yes, I understand, but these are the circumstances right now." You see, that's a completely different quality of conversation. So cruelty, it's our sense of rightness that allows us to be cruel. For example, during Stalker Project, I noticed how people, we had a session, how a person is cruel to themselves, but they don't call it cruelty. That is, when we talk about our non-legalized aspects, we're talking about how they have a different label stuck on them, as it were. Or it's a complete blind spot. And now, in this video, I'm bringing this out of the blind spot and into the light so that you can examine it. So I am hysterical, I am vulnerable, I am cruel, potentially cruel in certain moments and situations. Because, each one of us holds an idea of what is best for us, and we would like to force reality to adjust and serve us. And if we are intentionally cruel to something that is generally speaking perceived as having no real value or worth, then it's not generally considered cruelty. It's as if, like when the Nazis burned Jews or, killed them in various other horrific and inhumane ways, they did not consider themselves cruel because they believed they were simply getting rid of something disgusting, worthless, that was polluting this world, this space, getting rid of the wrong people. And so many people ask the question, why don't I recognize my own self-aggression? This is exactly why. Because it is simply not perceived as an act of cruelty, but rather as the correction or rectification of what is wrong. And a person can sometimes have this kind of internal perception or inner feeling. I'm doing everything right now at this very moment. This kindness, this quality of kindness, we want to fantasize that we are kind and not recognize our cruelty. It plays interesting games with our minds. For example, when we are all sweet-talking and accepting, we become arrogant, but we don't recognize it. That is kindness as patience for imperfect people. And I have so much patience, but I'm also tolerating these wrong, imperfect people. You see, by truly possessing these three qualities, it becomes really clearer how to deal with yourself. And I ask you to carefully pay special attention to this correction of yourself to be right, or punishing yourself for being wrong. And when you see the cruelty, you'll understand better why people react the way they do to some of your words. The next point is primitiveness. Primitiveness also goes unrecognized. Unrecognized. A person always wants to think they are smart. If you ask the question, Haura, how do you communicate with me? So I'm speaking with you as with a smart, calm, kind, and thoughtful person. Someone who is very much alive and present. And when a person communicates like that, it's amazing where all of that comes from in the way they build a connection. So primitiveness. It's easy to be smart when you rely on other people's knowledge, on other people's theories. Unfortunately, in universities, they teach us to be smart when writing our theses by relying on someone else's theory, on authorities. It's as if they don't teach us to think for ourselves. We have to prove, or at least demonstrate, that someone has already said this before. And as it turns out, many people seem quite smart to themselves when they learn about someone else's theory, pepper their speech with well-known quotes, or use some other banal, generic, and overused words that are in fact not original at all. Nothing, empty like soap bubbles. But as the person is covering something huge, such as everything will be fine, it seems smart. We say a lot of foolish things. We constantly say foolish things, and only from time to time do we say something truly smart. And this persistent desire to shine, to be seen as smart, often prevents a person from truly understanding what they're actually saying. They're as if chasing the feeling of this brilliance, of flaunting something. There, see what I said? I knew it. I suspected as much. So, even if a person has done something obviously foolish, they immediately start rationalizing it in some way to avoid seeing their own foolishness. And because of this, a person cannot get smarter. Until a person understands, I am foolish, I am weak, they cannot get smarter. This leads to a constant distortion of facts. And such people love to say, there's no objectivity, there's no truth. Everyone has their own opinion. And then I legitimize my own foolishness. Then I can spout illogical nonsense. And because I consider it smart, it's also correct. You see, there's a lot of right and wrong here. That's why I get so indignant when people ask me, so what's right and what's wrong? That is, essentially, we can place any thought or idea on a spectrum where it is either closer to foolishness or closer to intelligence. But a person who is getting smarter understands that even what seemed smart to them before is now foolish. And this is the ability to doubt. When I admit my own foolishness, then, for example, in sessions, I can doubt what I'm saying. Or when defending my point of view, I do it without foaming at the mouth because I understand that I can be wrong. And then living thought emerges, not just pulling out some theory you learned from somewhere. In other words, acknowledging our own foolishness immediately opens the door to genuine development and personal growth. But when we talk about truly admitting I'm hysterical, I'm weak, I'm cruel, I'm foolish, there's often an immediate urge to push away this disgusting creature within ourselves. Then we cannot state it, we can't speak about it without judgment. By the way, we once had a webinar on this topic about the ability to think without judgment and about how this constant right-wrong, good-bad evaluation affects our entire way of seeing the world. And when I am able to recognize all of this in myself, when I begin to notice it inside, with disgust, not by rejecting myself, it is then that I allow it to enter my field of vision. And then, when I say something, I can understand, am I saying this now out of my own pain, perhaps? Then I understand that I am being cruel. Even when I talk about pain while blaming another, I am behaving cruelly. Right now I'm speaking in an illogical way. I'm manipulating the facts so that I can be right. And here we have finally arrived at our last and most significant point, at the honest person. You see, in order to be truly good, and we need to be good so as not to fall under our own attack, we constantly have to manipulate reality. We cannot fully perceive it, neither the internal nor the external, because it's important for us not to be a liar, not to be an imposter. But a person who identifies with a fabricated self is a perpetual imposter. He does not live in his own body. He does not live his own destiny. He is a constant swindler. And this feeling that I am a swindler, that I can be exposed, each of you has experienced. But it's so unbearable to understand that you're lying now, that you're already starting to believe in what you've come up with in your theory. And when, for example, people talk about some kind of conflict, they distort the facts like this. To be completely sure that they were right, they were always the victims, and the other person was the aggressor. I was kind, I was intelligent, I was strong, I was calm, and the other person was hysterical, the other person was foolish, the other person was evil, and the other person lied. You see, all of this ends up being repressed in the outside world. And if we accept this, then we look at ourselves with hatred. The flip side of this so-called intelligence is a person who trusts no one. They always feel like he is being used and had, that he is not getting enough. For him, his desire to have this world always results in the suspicion that others also want to have him. Others are also so cunning, they want something for themselves, some kind of benefit. This paranoia is developing, and the only opportunity to build, somehow, relationship with the world often swings to another extreme. Either I trust no one and think everyone is foolish, or I admire and believe blindly, without questioning, without seeing clearly. I refuse to recognize hysteria, weakness, aggression, and primitiveness in myself. And as if I also refuse to see these things in others, it is as though the inner lens is broken, and so I see neither myself nor other people clearly. Try to allow this inside yourself. Try to notice it in yourself. And try to look at it without judgment, without complaints, without hatred. Look at it as something that truly exists, as something that is a part of you. And perhaps someone who feels brave enough, someone who is already ready to give to others, will share their experience in the comments. Which of these affects you the most? That you are emotionally unstable, perhaps even hysterical. Compare, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much it truly hurts you, how deeply you feel the pain. Consider how weak or vulnerable you are, from 1 to 10. That you are, in their eyes, an evil, cruel person, from 1 to 10. If you heard something like this, you're foolish, or you are lying and dishonest. Try to carefully understand and reflect on what exactly causes you the most significant emotional resistance in your life. No, that's not true. And try to understand why you don't see this in yourself. Perhaps you'll describe it. And everyone will write something of their own, and we'll have a more complete picture based on real-life cases from real people. I want to briefly recall a webinar I once spoke about. We hold monthly webinars in Russian. I decided to build it around two main pillars. The first pillar was a dialogue with an empty glass, and the second was a real-life situation that lasted only 5 minutes. And through these two examples, we were able to see what non-judgmental perception truly is, how it actually makes us stronger, truly stronger and wiser, how it helps us save our energy, and how much more becomes possible in life when we enter this mode of perception. With that, I say goodbye and see you next time.